You ask me questions and I'll answer as well as I
Okay,
can. Okay?
tell me about your childhood.
My childhood. I grew up in Melbourne. My father was a butcher. My mother worked in the butcher shop with him, and I became a butcher. That was my first job on leaving school. I left school very early.
So
And then
how old what was this? Like 15, 16?
It would have been the early 50s.
No, how old a kid were you?
I was 14 when I left school.
Wow.
Yeah, and I went into well, I became a butcher anyway, you know. And I worked as a butcher for many years, but at the same time, I was very interested in theatre. I fell in love with theatre when I was 14, and I went to see South Pacific, which had just opened in Melbourne at Her Majesty's Theatre, and of course I was besotted by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein, and they were the ones. And I wanted to write musical theatre. At that time, I was playing piano. I learned piano, and I still had lessons at that time. And I had more lessons when I was about 16, and I had lessons from a guy called Les Patching, and he was a jazz pianist. So he taught me a lot of chords, how to take a song and use different chords, more modern chords. And I used to do that. And then later on, I started writing music. And I submitted songs to the ABC because they used to have a program called These Are Our Songs.
Is it a radio show?
And yes, it was a radio show in the late 50s. And I submitted, the first song I submitted was a song called Autumn in Love. And they used to play about 8 new songs every week. And every week they'd select one of them as a winner or the best song of the week. And then the next week they would play that again, and the composer would get a £10 prize. It was pound, shillings and pence in those days. Well, this song, Autumn in Love, that won. The first time I entered the competition, it won first prize. So I was very pleased, and I sent a number of songs in. They used to do them with an orchestra because the ABC had an orchestra then.
And professional, so it was arranged by a professional arranger?
Oh, yes, it was all professional. Yes, it was all done by professional arrangers in that. So I don't know, but I think I must have had about 10 or 12 songs in this program. And it ran for a couple of years. And then they had a Sydney program called Write a Pop Song, I think it was. And once again, it was a similar sort of thing. And I entered songs in that, and I had several that were broadcast around that time. And then I joined a club. It was called the Bread and Cheese Songwriters Club. And I went along to this club, and everybody there was a composer. I was about the youngest at the time because I was still in my teens. And they used to have competitions, and people would write songs, pop songs, art songs, you name it. And then we had, at the end of the year, they used to have a concert. Well, I participated in this concert. It was like a review. And I wrote songs for this review. It happened, and that resulted in me being asked to write some review songs. And so I did write some review songs, but the show that they were meant for was cancelled. So they never got up. But then I saw in one of the papers, it was a radio magazine that used to come out every week. It was called The Listener In, that they mentioned a new review that was opening up in St Kilda, which is a suburb of Melbourne. And it was a professional show. So I went down, it hadn't opened, but they were about to open. And I went down to this theatre, which was only like a church hall type of thing, you know, it didn't seat very many people, maybe 100 people. And I talked to the producer and asked him, did he want any review songs? So he said yes. And I had 4 songs in the show that opened. It was called Off the Beach. It's called Off the Beach because On the Beach, the movie On the Beach, the Stanley Kramer movie, which had Fred Astaire in
Took place in Australia, right? It was filmed in Australia.
Yeah, it was filmed in Australia. It was filmed in Melbourne. That had just filmed in Melbourne. So this the title of this review was called Off the Beach. Well, I had 4 songs in it, and one of the songs was called I Played Around with Love and Lost. And when the reviews came out for the review, that was the only song that was mentioned in any of the reviews. So, of course, I was very pleased. You know, it was the beginning of my professional songwriting career. And then I continued to write for reviews in Melbourne, a lot of them. And then I met Don Batty at a late night review. And I didn't know him, but I was introduced to him by a friend. And we were talking about the show, and I said, what did you think of the review? It was a late night show. It started at 11:30 or something and ran for about an hour and a half. And he said, oh, I wasn't much, but I did like, I Played Around with Love and Lost, you see, which was in this show. And I said, well, I wrote that. And that was the start of our professional relationship. And from then on...
In the beginning, you were writing music and lyrics.
Yes, that's right. And I continued to write music and lyrics. And we decided that we would write a musical. And for the first 2 shows that we wrote, I wrote music and lyrics. And even some of the later shows, I also did music and lyrics as well, you know. And he wrote the book. And we decided to write a show. We wanted to write something about urban Australia, because anything we'd ever seen up to that time had all been a period piece, like set in gold rush days or bush ranges and all that sort of stuff, which was a long, long way away from urban, a contemporary thing. So we chose football because that was very popular in Melbourne and still is. And we were unaware at that time that musicals with a sporting theme pardon me, usually weren't successful. Damn Yankees, I think, was one of the few that was. And we'd seen Damn Yankees in Melbourne. Anyway, our show had nothing to do with Damn Yankees, and we devised a story about this club that had never won a premiership. And
did you have a love interest? Did you have women? Were women in this musical?
Oh yes, yes. There's lots of women. Yes. Well, we had 3 models, and the club had a Miss Mascot competition, and the 3 young models were all entered in there and everything, you know. And so, and then some of the players got involved with the models, And there was a love romance, and then the show finished, and it was a draw, and they had to play the game again the following week. You see, and from then on, we kept writing musicals. Don and I went to.
What was the critical response to that?
Oh, it was very good, very good. The critics liked it, and they liked the music, and they liked the lyrics, and I thought it was clever.
Do you remember a few song titles from the show?
Oh yes, a song called "Passionately," which I'd actually written for a review, and it was then in this show. It stopped the show. It was a funny song, and the girl who did it was funny, a comedian. And later on, it was used in another show. Actually, one of the local companies were doing a production of Rio Rita, and they put this song into the score of Rio Rita.
It took place in the American West, right? It was a...
Yeah, yes, I know. Anyway, John and I... other song titles were called Football, and that was a soft shoe, and that was done by a couple of guys, and that was popular.
And how many instruments would you have for this?
Oh, it was strictly 2 pianos. You know, it was a bit like they were doing in London then with Sandy Wilson and Julian Slade. It was 2 pianos. That was.
Were you familiar with what was going on in London at that time?
Oh yes, very familiar. I knew everything about it. And you see, in 1962, I went to London with Don, and we lived and worked in London, and stayed there for a year, and wrote another musical. So I was there when Stop the World, I Want to Get Off opened, things like that, you know. And
did you see that? Did you see it with Norman Wisdom? Anthony?
No,
it was originally
Anthony Newell.
Oh no, it was Roy the Grease Paint that was Norman Wisdom, and then
right.
They said he'd have to do it himself if he wanted the show to go to New York.
Well, that was yes, that came later. I think that was 64, but this was 61, and Sour Drum Song had just opened there, and Imola Deuce was running, and Bell, a British musical called Bell, that opened.
Dr. Crippen.
That's right, the Dr. Crippen one. That's right. Yeah. So I used to go about once a week to the musical.
So you tried to see everything, just to see what was going on?
Yes, I used to see everything. I went to the opera and ballet as well as musical theatre. You know. But I saw everything.
It was relatively cheap in those days?
Well, I only sat in the upper circle, Bruce, which was way up the back. My eyesight was better then than it is today, of course. You know, today, if I sat in the upper circle, it would just be a blob on stage. I wouldn't be able to make out the features at all. Anyway.
So what's the musical you're writing and doing that year?
Yes, it was a musical we called Don't Tell Elena. It was about university students getting a part-time job at Christmas in a department store. And one of them was a madcap university student, and she's hired to sell makeup, and she ends up giving it away. And this causes a big problem, you know, in the store and everything. So there were songs like Staunch Old Sales, which was a song sung by the permanent members of the department store. There's another song called Counter Hands, another one called Strike. And the principal role, which was written for a comedian, and she was very funny. She had a song, Born to be a Queen, and Neapolitan Anna. Now, Neapolitan Anna used to stop, well, they both stopped the show, but Neapolitan Anna was like a takeoff of The Most Happy Fella, which had played Melbourne in 1961. And so that was very popular. It was like very
So
well reviewed.
where was this produced?
It was produced in Melbourne at the Russell Street Theatre, and then it was produced the following year at the Union Theatre in the university. Then we continued to write, started writing some children's material, but the first major show musical we got on was A Bunch of Rat Bags. And that came about because I'd read a review of a book in the Australian newspaper, and they had serialized over a week or a couple of weeks excerpts from this book. And this book was set in Melbourne in the late 50s, and there were gangs of youths who were called bodgies and widgies at that time, and they were like the equivalent in London. You know, they used to wear winkle picker shoes and that sort of thing. Well,
Was this anything like West Side Story? Is that?
It's very West Side Story. Well, not really West Side Story. It was.
I mean, were they really trying to hurt each other at times?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Switchblades and.
Yes. All that, and so we wrote this show, and it was put on by Emerald Hill Theatre, which was an alternative theatre, because in that time, I mean, in the 1950s, there was no, outside of J.C. Williamson's and Garnet Carroll, they were the major entrepreneurs. There was no permanent drama company. And then the university, they started one, and they used to run 3 months of the year. This is early in the 50s. And that provided professional employment for actors other than J.C. Williamson. In Sydney, it was the Phillip Street Review, and they provided, they started in about 53, and they provided professional work for actors. Well, Emerald Hill Theatre was a small theatre in Melbourne, and they did alternative theatre to what was being done at the Union Theatre. Union Theatre would do Cowan, he would do Shaw, Tennessee Williams, stuff like that. But Emerald Hill, they did Brecht on Brecht. They did, and they did some original plays. And one of them was A Bunch of Rat Bags. It was the second musical they did. I think it was in their 6th year of operation. And it was the most successful. And it was the only show that premiered at Emerald Hill Theatre that had a life outside its original performance. And it was done everywhere in the 60s, in Sydney and all that. We did it got good reviews, and then we did we reworked the script because we thought it needed more comedy. So we did that for a production in 1973, and we added more songs. Saturday Night, which was pretty strong stuff, the gang members bashing up people in the park, and another song called Old Times, where the mother and father reminisce about what it was like back in the Depression, because this was set in the late 50s. And it got good reviews, it really did, you know, and it was the last production, or the major production of it, was in the 2000, and that's the one I recorded, you know, and you've seen that CD of the full score. Following that, we were approached by an actress called Leela Blake to do a musical of Carolyn Chisholm. Carolyn Chisholm was a Catholic convert who was born in England, came to Australia, and she helped immigrant girls, and this is back in the 1840s. And so we hadn't written anything historical, and so we embarked on this. And Caroline was very successful, and it spawned an LP, an original cast LP. We had a 4-piece group. It toured, and throughout it was done in 71 originally, and I think throughout the 70s and the 80s it was done by just about every Catholic school in the country. You know, it was in the licensing was in the chapel and companies. They had the licensing rights.
That's very impressive.
Yes, and so they licensed it everywhere, and everybody did it. But it ran out of steam, I think, about the early 90s or something.
It was never done in America, right?
No, it wasn't. No. It ran out of steam because, you know, at that time, the woman who was handling the rights for chapel said, you know, look, they only want to do Return to the Forbidden Planet and things like that, you see, the schools. And so it was a shift in the thinking, and it was also like the beginning of jukebox type musicals around the early 90s and that. So, but Caroline had a good life, and it was done by many companies. We were then asked to write something for the Adelaide Festival. The Adelaide Festival of Arts began in 1960. It used to be done every 2 years. And we were asked to write something for the 1972 Adelaide Festival. And so we wrote 2 one-act, we called them folk operas. They were sort of like Most Happy Fella. They were sung through. And it was about love in a commercial world. One of them was called Love Travelling Salesman, and was about a male prostitute who went to the country and hired himself out to the lonely women of the country towns. The other was set in a computer installation and was about finding love on the computer. And these were well in advance of, you know, later on when computer dating came in. They played as a double bill at the Adelaide Festival in 1972. Then one of our earlier shows was done, and it was a spoof of the 1940s, and it was called, originally it was called It Happened in Tangier, which was a mix of Tangiers and Casablanca. And it had characters at the time, Tweedy Englishwoman, American film star, Marlene Dietrich, Countess. And it was, we were asked, could this work for a theatre restaurant? And so we cut it down to a chorus, 6 characters. And so we had it in a chorus, a tap dancing chorus in the original. We cut that out and we made everybody the chorus, as it were, you know. And that was very successful, and it ran for 6 months. So it played a lot of performances. And then that show was done in Brisbane, and that ran a good time too. And we were asked to do a follow-up, and we did a follow-up, and it was called Sweet Fanny Adams. we gave the 40s one a different title. It was called Red, White and Boogie. Anyway, Sweet Fanny Adams was about two madams in Sydney, notorious madams in Sydney in the 30s, who were at war with each other. And that was successful, and that ran for 6 months too, which was good. But by then, we had started on a series of children's musicals for the Alexander Theatre at Monash University. And we started, and we adapted fairy tales. The first one was Rumpelstiltskin, then we did The Shoemaker and the Elves, Jack and the Beanstalk, The Emperor's New Clothes, Beauty and the Beast. And the only Australian one we did was a thing called Billabong Bill. And it was about animals in the bush, and their water was being polluted by a chemical company. And the guy who ran the chemical company, he was the nasty, of course. He wore the black hat. These were very successful, and they were done, and they're still done today, actually, around the country. We did 7 in all. And then, well, by that stage, I was working in television. And I had a major career.
How did you get into television?
Well, I moved from Melbourne because I had a butcher shop in Melbourne. I took over my father's butcher shop, and then that was sold. And I had a butcher shop myself, and I became quite big in the meat industry. I was voted on to the board of the Meat and Allied Trades Federation of Australia. And I sat on the board there. And I was also the chairman of the meat promotion company as well. But I moved from Melbourne to Sydney. I sold the shop, and when I went to Sydney, then I wanted to write for television. And I sat down and I taught myself to type, because I couldn't type. And I taught myself to type, and I submitted some script samples to both of the major producing companies in Australia. One was called Reg Grundy, and the other was called Crawford's. And Reg Grundy came back to me. They were the first ones that came back to me, and they offered me a job. So I started writing scripts for a soap opera. The soap opera was called The Young Doctors. And I think about 4 weeks after I started writing for them, they offered me a job as a script writer on the series. And what I did, Bruce, was I used to watch the series, and I found out as much as I could. This was before before I started writing scripts. And I made a graph of all the characters in the show and everyone they'd had an affair with, you know. So this was a very complicated affair that I knew absolutely everybody, every character in the show and who they'd been with.
You had 20 some, how many people were
Oh,
in the cast?
yeah, there was about 28, 30 people in the cast, you know. So
they all had sex? Is there anyone who didn't have sex?
Oh, yeah. No, sex, of course they did. Yes, yes. And babies and things like that. Well, I started writing scripts for the show, and then they asked me would I be script editor. Well, of course, I knew a lot about it, so I was in a good position then. And I wrote, still wrote scripts for it as well as script editing. And we used to do 5 episodes every week, 5 half-hour episodes. That's a lot of television, and it's very hard to keep up that standard. In all, we made about 1,300 programs, and I worked on 600 of them. So it was quite a lot. And then the position of production manager of the company came up, and I put my hand out, and I wasn't sure whether I could do it or not, but I did. And I was given the position, and I became head of production for the company. And every drama that came out of the company in Australia in the 80s came under my umbrella. And one of the shows is a show called Neighbours, which was shown in the US. And it's still shown today in the UK. It's in its 23rd year. No, started in 85, so it's still going. So that's, yes, it's over 35 years old it is. But I set the production up. And it was made in Melbourne, and it's still going, and it became, at its height, which would have been in the late 80s, in England. It became very popular in England. It was shown twice a day in England. It had an audience of 22 million people, which was pretty good, you know. I mean, it was almost the entire population of Australia. Australia only had a population of 26 million in those days, so that was pretty good. And I continued to write for television and set up television. And then in the late 70s, no, the late 80s it would have been, I was asked to go to America, to Los Angeles, and set up a production of a show called Dangerous Women. And that was a spin-off of a prison, a women in prison type show, theme show. I did that, and we made 52 episodes, and that was sold around the country, and it was successful.
Was there anybody in that we would know today?
No, I don't think so, really, no. The nearest was a young guy, I can't think of his name now, but he did go on and do a few movies after he was in the show. So that was in the early 90s. And then I was asked by the company, would I go down and open up South America? So I went down to South America, and I decided to make our base in Chile because that had the most stable economy in all of the region down there. And we made programs in Chile and Argentina and Uruguay and Paraguay and Mexico and Venezuela. And that's when I got to making game shows. But I also made some drama, some comedy. A very successful series in Australia was called Mother and Son. It was made by the ABC. Well, I got the rights to that, and we made it in Chile, and made, well, I've forgotten how many episodes we made, but it was a very good show for Chile, because the idea was this mother, a man who had been married, gets divorced, and he goes back to live with the mother, who's a cantankerous old biddy. And that was a scenario that was very, not say popular, but it was very recognisable to a Chilean audience, because guys in Chile didn't leave home until they married. So if they didn't marry until they were 40, they were still living at home with their parents or one of their parents, you know. And it was very successful. And the company made it in lots of European territories. I think it was made in Switzerland, it was made in Sweden as well. So the company that I was working for had an international base, or an international footprint, shall we say. It was sold, it was called Grundy Productions originally, but it was sold to, first of all, to Pearson's, which was a British company, and then it was sold to Fremantle Media, and that's what it is today. They make American Idol and shows like that, you know. Then it was during the 90s, the early 90s, that Don Batty and I wrote our last musical together, which was called Prisoner Cell Block H musical. And that was based on a Grundy format called Prisoner. Very popular. The show became very popular late night in England, and we acquired the rights to it, and we wrote a musical version of the show, and it went on in London at the Queen's Theatre with Lily Savage, drag queen. And the idea was this drag queen was accused of something in Australia and thrown into a women's prison. So we did all the tropes of a prison drama, but with a drag queen in women's prison. It was an inspired idea and very funny. It ran in the West End for 3 months, or 100 performances, which is a lot longer than a lot of others were. And then it played, did a tour in, this was, I think, 95, it was in the West End. Then 96 we did a tour of the UK, and 97 did a tour of the UK as well. So it was successful, you know. It was fun, very funny. And that's brings me up to date, I suppose, with, I then left.
Let's talk a little of the Broadway by the year and how you got involved in that.
Well, what happened was I left the company, and then I set up Bayview, and this would have been the late 90s. And I then started reissuing things that hadn't been reissued on CD, recording some new stuff. But then I got involved with Broadway by the Year, Scott Siegel's Broadway by the Year. And that was a very good series to do. I loved doing it, of course, because...
Well, had you seen, did you just happen to go to see one and thought to yourself, because
I had seen one, yeah. I forget which one it was, but I mean, I had seen it, yes. And whenever I was in New York, and I used to be in New York a bit because I lived in Miami, you know, and I used to come up to New York and see what was happening. And so we just started doing Broadway by the Year albums, and I think I did about 20 of them or something, you know. And then we took it.
Brad Bennett was a friend of yours, and he suggested that somebody named Bruce Yacko might be able to help sell them.
Yes, probably it was him. Yes, Brad Bennett was a friend. And I've forgotten the guy who introduced me to Scott Siegel. Anyway, it proved to be a very good marriage, shall we say, you know, because we had some very good people on there, like Brent Barrett and Liz Calloway, a lot of good people, and a lot of people who are doing stuff today who've made a bigger name for themselves since they did Broadway by the Year. After that, when I went back to Australia. I came back to Australia in the early 2002, as a matter of fact. And since that time, I've reinvented myself as a theatre reviewer and a theatre journalist. And I write for 2 magazines. And I review theatre for them, or not at the moment, of course, but I do review theatre for them. And I write, review theatre CDs or DVDs, and I review books on theatre as well. So that's what I do now. I've written a couple of other shows, of course, but mainly I review stuff. And Since the coronavirus, the magazine Stage Whispers, they've asked me would I do reviews of the live performances that they've been showing on television. So I did Phantom of the Opera, and I did Love Never Dies, and I did Peter Pan, NBC's Peter Pan, and I've done one for what Lincoln Centre were doing this week, which is Carousel. I've done a lot of actually. I think I've done about 15 or 20 in the last few weeks. So that's keeps me busy, Bruce, you know.
Did they ever film any shows and show them on television in Australia?
I haven't, but there is a company that does some plays here, and they show them on television. Yeah.
The idea of what are some of the composers that you're particularly fond of?
Well, I like Pasek and Paul. I think the score of Greatest Showman is terrific. And I can understand why it was the most streamed score a couple of years ago in the UK. I know as a movie, it didn't get a great review from the critics, but I enjoyed it, and I certainly enjoyed the music. And I think their score for Dear Evan Hansen is interesting, and there's some nice stuff in it. I like Jason Robert Brown.
What about La La Land? They wrote the lyrics for
La La
Land.
Land. I like that. Yeah, yes, it's good stuff.
Although it bothered me at the end, where it looks like they're going to get together. You see them, they end up together, and then that's not true.
No, I know.
Replay it.
I know. But I like Jason Robert Brown, and I think the last production of his I saw was Bridges of Madison County. I think it's a good score, and I love It All Fades Away. The song It All Fades Away, I think it's lovely in that, you know, really terrific. I think he writes music that's capable of crossing the footlights. That's what throughout my life, you know, I mean, I like musical theatre to have heart. I'm not, so therefore I prefer Rodgers and Hammerstein to Sondheim in a way, because Sondheim is very cerebral and it's very clever, but I prefer something that's going to affect me emotionally, and I think Rodgers and Hammerstein does that. And Jerry Herman certainly does that. I fell in love with Jerry Herman because when I was in New York, the first time I ever went to New York was coming back from London in 1961, and I saw Milk and Honey on stage at Martin Beck. And of course, I fell in love with Jerry Herman's music. I loved it, I adored it, because it, to me, it crossed the footlights. And that's what a theatre score has got to do, cross the footlights. And I think Jason Robert Brown has that ability to cross the footlights.
But I've been told by people who do musicals that the key for a musical is the book. That you can be given great songs and a not too interesting book, or a book that doesn't make a lot of sense, and yet the book writer normally, you don't say Milk and Honey by Don Appel, or I don't even know how he pronounces his name.
Mm.
We don't know book writers, do we, the way we do?
No, we don't. We don't know book writers, no, and we should, because book writers are.
I think the problem is one can make so much more in television and even films that, you know, the temptation.
Well, I think you've got to love the theatre to write for it, really, you know. I mean, a few years ago, Bruce, here, I was invited by one of these, by a a training institute to talk to the students on musical theatre. Well, I was appalled when I went there, and I asked the students what had they seen, and none of them had been to a musical. Now, I don't care. If you are studying musical theatre, you've got to go to a musical. You've got to see what it's all about. It can't all be academic at all. And this was, you know, I don't know whether it's changed, but you know, that's what it was like.
I think that I think the writers of today are anywhere near the heights of Rogers and Porter and Gershwin.
Sometimes I think yes, because I do like what the writers of Hairspray, Mark Shaman,
Yes, yes.
did. I think that Hairspray is one of the best original musicals of the last 20 years or more. It works, it's very clever, the lyrics are clever, and the music is very appealing, and it gets in your ear. It's earworm friendly, as they say, Bruce, you know. I think they're very good writers, and what they did for Bombshell was excellent. In the musical in Smash. Not everything they've done has been a runaway hit, of course, but what they did for Mary Poppins too was extremely good. Lovely, lovely stuff.
That's my favorite movie musical of all time.
Well, there you are. You see, I mean, I think they've done. Sometimes writers of today can reach the heights of what's gone before. But Gershwin and Porter and Lesser were all wonderful. That's why they keep being performed today.
What do you think of contemporary music?
I find it hard. I'm not a lover of hip hop. It's hard to understand. It's so fast. But Hamilton is a very enjoyable show to watch. I enjoyed it. I couldn't say it's my favourite musical, but it's enjoyable to watch.
But see, young people think this is the greatest musical ever written.
Well, they haven't seen anything else.
Well,
That's the problem.
Most kids today, you said I believe kids do go to the theater, but they only want to know musicals from their lifetime.
Well, that's right. Wicked. They don't want to know anything before Cats.
Well, some of them were born in 1995. They don't even want to know. Cats was around, though. Cats wouldn't leave until.
No. I like Andrew Lloyd Webber, Bruce, because you know I think he writes like Love Never Dies mightn't be the most wonderful score, but those two songs, Till I Hear You Sing and the title song, Love Never Dies, are just wonderful. They're so emotional, and they were emotional in the theatre when I saw it, you know. I saw Sarah Boggess Stewart in London, sing it in London, and of course it had Raman Carolou as the Phantom, and that was a wonderful combination. And it was beautiful music, beautiful. That's like I remember going to London in 1985, I think it was, and I had a ticket to see Phantom of the Opera, and it was on the last night of previews. It was due to open the following night. Well, Sarah Brighton she was off. She didn't do the show that night. Claire Moore sang it, but Michael Crawford didn't. And of course, I was besotted with it. I thought it was absolutely wonderful, and that suddenly the musical theatre was singing again. After all those years of like Catherine Hepburn not being able to sing, Lauren Bacall being a terrible vocalist, and Judi Dench, for instance, you know, suddenly we had musical theatre that was singing. And then the same trip, I went to see Les Miserables. And of course, glorious voices, the original was, you know. And at that point, I was so happy to have musical theatre really singing with great voices and filling the theatre with wonderful sound. And I think if Andrew Lloyd Webber has done nothing else, he's put the music back into musical theatre.
What do you think of Sunset Boulevard?
Oh, I like it. I like it. Yes, I like it. And Glenn Close, I've seen Glenn Close, and she was very good.
But I'm very disappointed in her voice. Really. If you watch her, you forget that she can't. She used to sing well. She was in Barnum and Rex, and she was fine. But today, she is not fine. Sunset Boulevard, in my opinion, is her Patti LuPone is a terrific singer, and Glenn Close is not.
Well, yes, that's true. It's a great acting performance.
Yes.
It is a great acting. Now, I must tell you, Bruce, in the past few years, I've been working on this book. And this is produced last year. It's called The Australian Musical from the Beginning, and I wrote it with a guy in Melbourne called Peter Wiley Johnson. And it covers 100 years of musical theatre in Australia, original musical theatre. It was published by Allen and Unwin, and it's a beautiful book. It was launched last November, so before the coronavirus, and it's sold very well. I mean,
where could people buy this?
Oh, well, it's like, you know, Barnes and Noble, anybody, you know.
Is it on Amazon? Could one go on Amazon?
It's on Amazon. It's on all of the places. Booktopia, Book Depository, all of them. They've got it. It retails for about $79. You might get it cheaper. I mean, a lot of book places have it cheaper.
A lot of pictures, and it's an expense. Those books are expensive to make.
Oh yes, they are. Yes. It's got a lot of pictures, and as I said, it covers the first. It's in two sections. The first section is an overview of the whole period. The second is an in-depth study of over 324 musicals, and it's got lots of entries from the US. It doesn't matter where it was done, in other words, what's in the book. If it was done in London or if it was done in New York, there's an Australian connection, and it's in the book. So, I mean, you find things like Boy from Oz with Hugh Jackman are in there, and you find Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, in there as well. So it's a very good book and very interesting to read. It took Peter and I 8 years. From the time we started and signed the contract that we will work on this together, it took us 8 years until it was sold and until it came to fruition.
So were a lot of people helpful in giving you pictures? And
yes, but that's the hardest thing of all, of course, is sourcing pictures, because some people don't keep them and that, you know. And a lot of actors will say, oh, they'll throw them out and they'll say, oh, you can get that in the archives. Well, as Frank Van Straten, who used to run the Performing Arts Museum in Melbourne, said to me, unless somebody donates it or gives it to the archives, it's not going to be in the archives, you know, which is very true. So they have it's wrong to believe that everything is in the archives. It's not. Some things are, and we got pictures from London, and we got pictures from New York as well. We bought them, you know, the rights to redo them. because it starts with 1916 and Choo Chin Chow in London, which of course ran for 5 years in London and was the most popular musical in the world. Well, that was written by a guy who was Oscar Ashe, and he was born in Geelong in Victoria. So it starts with that, and it goes as far forward as 2000 no, it goes as far forward as 2019. So we've got lots of entries. It's even got Beetlejuice in it, Bruce.
King Kong? Is King Kong in it?
King Kong's in it, yes.
Tell us about the Australian production of King Kong.
Oh, look, it played the Regent Theatre. It got terrible notices.
Is this a very big theatre? Is it a big theatre?
Yes, of course it's a big theatre. That's where they played, I think it seats about 1,500 or 1,600 people. And sometimes, look, it wasn't doing any good business, but they kept it on for 6 months or more, you know. They had unlimited finance.
Well, I'm sure they planned to come to America and then hopefully everywhere after that. But
well,
I think at this point, King Kong is probably unemployed permanently.
Oh, yes, I know. But, I mean, it's the sort of thing that will work in a theme park. You know, they sold it to a Japanese theme park, and it's being done there. And I think other theme parks, it's a good idea they could do. You know, there's lots of theme parks in Asia too that would love it, because it's that sort of show. You know, but it leaves a lot to be desired as far as the musical goes. I think. You saw it, did you?
Yes, but people are now saying that Beetlejuice is amongst their all-time. These are young people, of course. That Beetlejuice. What do you remember? What you saw on Broadway? Oh, Beetlejuice.
Well, I never saw Beetlejuice, but
Have you heard the album?
Yeah, I've heard the album. Yes. Look, that's not too bad for the sort of thing that it is. And I know young people like it, and they probably made it a hit.
But it's a very popular movie, and they have very good Broadway people in it.
Yes, they do.
King Kong, they had no one that anyone had ever heard of. They give all the money to the monkey and nothing.
They had an ape to sell. And they did sell it with the ape. The ape was marvellous, I thought, you know, and the manipulation of the ape and all the features, the facial features that they made the ape do, they were wonderful.
Have you ever seen War Horse in theatre?
Yes, I love War Horse. Very good. Yes, I did. I saw it at Lincoln Centre, I think. I saw it.
Yes.
Years ago. Yeah. So, the Tim Minchin, I think the score of Matilda's got some good things in it.
Yes, I really love Matilda.
Yeah, Matilda's fine, and they're making a movie of it, so hopefully we'll translate the movie.
I thought Groundhog Day was pretty good, and yet...
Oh, Groundhog Day was good. Yes, that was very good, yeah.
Although the guy comes across as very unappealing, and then he changes. But I think too long is he the, why do I care? You know, I'm just in it for me. I mean, that's a little to the point, but there should be some sign that there was something to begin with that he could turn into a sweet guy.
Yeah. I enjoyed Groundhog Day, the musical, better than the movie, actually.
At one point, Sondheim was considering Groundhog Day as a musical.
And he said, you can't improve on something that's perfect. And so he put it away. Okay. get me wrong, you know, I like Sondheim, like the recent Sondheim birthday concert was, you know, I enjoyed it. But I think the earlier stuff, like what he wrote for Saturday Night. I enjoyed Anyone Can Whistle's material. I enjoyed
Forum.
Evening Primrose. You know, I love all those songs, and I like them better than the latest stuff. You know.
Passion again is a very difficult story to appreciate.
Oh,
Why he would leave a beautiful girl for somebody who's not at all appealing and say, well, if someone loves you, you have to do that. Well, that's nice for the unattractive person. I wish that was true, but I don't believe it is.
no, I don't believe it is either. And that's something that I don't think worked. I mean, I remember when I saw Passion on Broadway and Donna Murphy was there, the audience laughed, not with it, at it.
Right.
Because it was just a ridiculous situation. It just didn't translate well, you know? And I can understand why they laughed, because I wanted to laugh too.
There should have been something that explained it, at least from some point of view, that, oh, but it was better. I saw it with Melissa Errico, and then Rebecca Luker did it also too in a 100-some seat theater, and it was much more effective because I had seen it from the balcony,
Right.
and I did not feel part of it at all. And I got to see, you know, somebody right in front of me and see the anguish that you know, people were going through. That was meaningful.
Yeah. Good. Well, they're both terrific performers. Melissa Errico, great. She's on your album of Sadie Thompson.
Yes. Not too many people know about that. That's a well-kept secret, unfortunately. I think it's a
Well,
wonderful.
I like the album. I like the score.
I was criticized because the songs aren't exactly in the order of which they were, but songs came in and out, and we just played through. They wrote enough songs for 2 shows.
Right.
And Melissa and the musical director, and I was watching. I mean, I occasionally said, yes, I like that song. But we picked the best songs, and you know, we didn't do the last song first or anything like that. But you know,
No.
to me, it's nitpicking that you do a song in the first act that could be in the second act. But you know.
Oh, it's all right as long as the songs are good.
Right. So I'm still doing what I'm doing now is the Lost Broadway.
Yeah.
Lost Broadway more. Have you heard any of those? We have to send
Yes,
you some of them.
I've got some of them.
I got 2 new ones, and I'm working on a 3rd edition that I've been privileged to have a wonderful young singer who's part of our household here. And
I had a look at Chloe Hodnett.
yes.
Yeah. Oh, good voice.
Thank you.
I mean, needs a bit more training, I think.
She's only 17 years old, but to me,
well,
she has thrilling. When I hear, it's like she's singing just a little higher than everyone else.
Yeah.
You could hear, and without any effort and without any strain. I mean, glitter and
there's
beat.
a lot of potential in Bruce. A lot of potential.
I hope there's a Broadway in her future. That there's a Broadway.
Well, we all hope Broadway's going to be in
her future.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, do you have any parting advice to the musical theater world?
Not really. Just.
What sort of musical, if you were to write another musical, if a big producer, Scott Rudin says, you know, Peter, I got Hugh Jackman, and the next musical is going to be by you and someone else. What off the top of your head?
Well, well,
What comes to mind?
it's what you said earlier on. It comes with the idea or the book. And I wouldn't dare touch anything unless it had a strong book or a strong story, frankly, you know.
This is Hugh
I think an
Jackman.
adaptation of some sort would be best of all. You know.
Hugh Jackman was going to do Houdini.
Yes, I know. I don't know what
That's why
happened there.
And ultimately, I believe, and this is you'll gossip, but I believe the problem again it was with the book.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Stephen Schwartz is certainly capable of giving good tunes to a good story.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, look, recently, my a couple of composers are here, Dean Bryant and Matthew Frank, who've written a few things. They did a musical version of the Australian movie My Brilliant Career, which started Judy Davis's career. And the score is good. I'm told, though, the problem with it was the book. It's had a one production at Monash, I think it was last year, but I'm told that
Was it a long, complicated story, which you could do in a film, but not so much on Broadway? I mean, they tell you you make it as brief, a day is an ideal length for a story in a musical, but
True, true. But anyway, it's you've got to have the right subject, you've got to have the right idea, I think, and also you've got to have somebody who knows musical theatre and can write a book. I mean, it's all very well people say, oh, look, I don't know anything about musical theatre and I'm going to write a musical. Well, they have to know something, you know. I mean, it's very rare that somebody who hasn't been exposed to musical theatre can actually write for it. As I said before, you know, you've got to have music that crosses footlight, although everything's these days is mic'd so heavily that really doesn't matter. Everybody hears everything when you're in theatre. But nevertheless, I think you still need to know something about theatre to write for it.
I think the idea of opening up a musical on Broadway, if you've never written a musical before, is never a good idea.
No.
The pop songwriter is a Pretty Woman. Have you heard the album? You haven't seen the show, but they're just basically pop songs. They could be sung by anybody, with rare exceptions. They're just, I love you.
Yes, they're not.
They don't further the story.
They're not tailored to the story at all. No.
Right.
Alan Menken, I think, is a terrific writer. I like his work.
What do you think is the strongest melody? What do you feel is the strongest melody? Beauty and the Beast or A Whole New World?
No, Beauty and the Beast, I think. But then I love his score for Newsies, because Newsies is a good show, and that worked in the theatre.
It's amazing because, the movie was not a success at all, but Disney kind of decided, oh, we're not going to put any money into backing this. But it became popular because of tapes, discs, VHS, and then DVDs, and show on television. And there was a market, and I must say, I've never seen dancing like that. I've seen something like 10,000 musicals.
I know.
I've never seen dancing like that.
The dancing was superb, and the video captures it all beautifully.
Right.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, thank you for giving us an hour or so of your time. And
thank you for asking me, Bruce. You know. It's nice to go back and
It is really exciting. I can't believe that you're actually in Australia. you're
oh
not
well.
you're not down the street in Wilton, Connecticut, and you're just pretending to be
No,
in Australia.
I'm not.
Is there a koala bear that you could produce that would prove to me
No,
that
I
you're in
can't.
Australia?
I haven't got a koala bear.
Are
Not at
are koala
all.
bears as prevalent?
Oh yes, they're in. We have them in Brisbane in certain areas. There's because we've got some green areas and park areas, and the koalas in the trees.
Again, thank you very much, and we'll chat
All
again.
right. Yes, we will.
Bye bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.